Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from different parts of the world. Welcome, mabuhay, Juan Ying Naija. Welcome, everyone. We are so happy you can join us today in our CHC webinar series 2022 and beyond. We are excited for today's topic, healthcare marketing under pressure, how to improve client agency performance. Today, we will learn and understand from our speaker why the healthcare category is one of the most demanding when it comes to client-agency relationships, and what can be done to improve performance on both sides of this partnership. But before we start, I would like to encourage everyone to expand your mind by thinking about these 4 questions while listening to our speaker and moderator. What excites you? What concerns you? What would you like to know more about? And what ideas come to mind? If you have any questions and thoughts, ideas while listening, please feel free to pop your questions in our chat box. Our team will put all of this together and ask our speaker at the end of the session. And now, let us welcome our speaker for the day, Mr. Kim Walker. Kim is the founder and chairman of Aprais, the world's leading relationship management company that builds stronger, more productive relationships between many of the world's leading marketers and communication agencies. Before establishing Aprais in 2000, Kim spent 30 years in the advertising industry. He has held leadership positions in Singapore, Hong Kong, New York, and Tokyo. These include positions with global agency networks across Asia-Pacific region, including Chief Operating Officer for Carat Asia-Pacific, President Isobar Asia-Pacific, and Regional President and CEO for MNC Saatchi. Now, our host for today is Mr. Dave McCaughan. Dave is our Senior Consumer Healthcare Training Academy consultant and trainer, and a storyteller at Bibliosexual. Dave has over 30 years of reach experience with globally known advertising and communication companies. He has led Asia-Pacific strategy planning, insights and market researches for various brands. He has over 500 appearances globally and is a frequent writer and author for Advertising Age, Campaign Asia, Research World, and many other regional publications. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please everyone help me in welcoming Kim and Dave.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Sheila. Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to host this session with my old friend, Kim. Kim and I had sort of known of each other for many years, have known each other personally, as in being friends and sometimes drinking buddies for a few years. Strangely, we both ended up moving to Bangkok or back to Bangkok in the same year, about 7, 8 years ago. And even more strangely, we ended up being near neighbours. So things creep on crossing over. But the other thing is that before I knew Kim, before I knew Kim was actually the founder of Aprais, and I was also a client of Aprais in my old agency job. And so it's sort of significant that we're having this discussion today because I've been on the side of being the agency guy, working with some key clients who were using Aprais and trying to make that all come together and learning the things about it. But also, I've also been involved, particularly in the health area, with a number of clients and then also with agencies and helping both sides. And to the subject tonight that Kim's going to talk about, really finding that sometimes there's a huge mismatch in terms of expectations on both sides. And perhaps the use of services like Aprais, et cetera, can really help solve some of those mismatching issues. So Kim, great that you're here with us, buddy. I know that you're going to take us through a presentation about some learnings you've had about Aprais, and particularly in relevance to health marketing in terms of both the agencies and the client relationships and how to improve those. And of course, I'm going to interject and ask some silly questions as you go along, just to keep you awake.
Of course you will.
So,
of course you will.
Always silly questions. So off we go.
Well, I first of all, a word of sympathy to everyone who's listening in, because normally on these seminars, you only have to listen to one Australian accent, but on this occasion, you have to listen to two. So sympathies, and I'll try and speak slowly and clearly so that you can at least understand this Australian. A little bit easier than Dave's accent, I must say. So look, so today's session, of course, is about healthcare marketing under pressure and how to improve client agency performance. You know, I guess the question that is foremost in many people's minds is, what's this thing about evaluating, and why do we even bother evaluating, you know, our agency partners, or what's the importance of a client agency relationship? And I think, you know, we believe that the CMO in today's business world is very much like a Formula One driver, you know, surrounded by teams of agency and their own client brand people. And if you look at this sequence, you can see that in the space of a remarkable 2 seconds, that's the world record for this, you can see how every individual member of this team knows exactly what they have to do. There is no overlap. They take full responsibility. They get the job done efficiently so that the CMO or the racing driver can get on their way very, very quickly. If you think about it in that context, you can see that if you can manage the roles and responsibilities of each member of the team, you're going to be able to build stronger business. We believe strongly that strong relationships actually build stronger business. And I'd like to just sort of explain a few reasons why. First of all, companies with stronger business relationships trust each other more. It just, again, it's common sense, I guess. But you know, if you have a better business relationship, you inevitably will trust the person that you're working with, and the vice versa is true. Together, you will end up doing work of a higher quality. And I'm going to show you a very short analysis in a moment that will prove this point. There's more candid communication between the parties. So issues are identified and resolved quicker. And if you think there's a similarity between these points and the relationship you have with your partner at home, of course, it's a relationship, and there are very, very distinct parallels between the two. You'll have the opportunity to expand the scope of work if there is a good relationship between the parties involved. Staff will go the extra mile for each other if they enjoy working with you, and vice versa. Also, if there is a stronger relationship, the chances of staff turnover are perhaps reduced. That enables accumulated learning, and the experience will build up over time. You'll be able to tackle issues before they become problems. And let's face it, as is the case with a marital divorce, maintenance is a lot cheaper and less disruptive than the cost of replacement. It's a terrible thing to say, but boy, it's true. And, you know, so often in this world of marketing communications, some marketers believe that, you know, the easiest solution is just to pitch it out and change agency. We all know from experience that that is seldom the answer, and that actually the cost involved in that and the disruption is enormous. So let's go back to the agenda for the And I'm a believer that when I put out an invitation to a webinar, that I actually follow fulfill the promise that was made in the agenda. So I'm going to do that today. First of all, we're going to talk about the 4 essential truths about business relationship, things that we have evidence of from our analysis. Secondly, we'll talk about how relationships in the healthcare category in specific compare with other business categories. Now, we are talking specifically about healthcare because that's the thrust of today. But I want to make clear that the statements that we make about relationships in healthcare are in some respects different, but not entirely unique. So the learnings that you get from the session today are applicable to other relationships in other categories. And as I will offer later on, we do have some category insight reports that you'll be able to download for yourself. What characteristics are important in healthcare marketing and agency teams? Let's talk about the 7 behaviours that distinguish the best from the worst in the healthcare client agency relationship, and how to build stronger business relationship with your healthcare agency partner. We'll give some tips. And what our data reveals about team behaviours during the COVID lockdowns. Of course, we've been through extraordinary times, and we have some learning that I'd like to share with you. So let's kick straight into the 4 essential truths. I must say first to begin with that the data that you're going to see, the analysis and the insights, come from around about 23,000 client agency evaluations that Aprais has conducted since its inception over 20 years ago. These have been conducted globally across many, many different categories. So we have probably the world's best database of client agency relationships. And as I'll go on to explain, they're not unique to clients and agencies in the Marcoms area. Many of our data will apply to other categories and other teams. So truth number 1, clients get the agencies they deserve. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because we stole it from David Ogilvy, who said clients get the advertising they deserve. But we say clients get the agencies they deserve because our analysis of 23,000 relationships actually show a direct correlation between the scores that a client gives the agency and the scores that the agency then gives the client. So if you look at this in terms of the bands of scores, you can see there is a cluster that follows this line, this correlation line. So what it means is that the higher the score gets for the clients, the higher the score gets for the agencies. And a point I want to make here is something that we get asked a lot. Who drives the relationship? Is it the responsibility of the agency to up its game so that the client becomes happier? Or is it the client that can create an environment that is better, that enables the agency to raise up? And we believe it's the latter, that the client is in the driving seat because they pay the bills and the agency is the supplier, in effect, to the client. And so it's required of the client to improve their behavior to enable the agency to actually lift its game. And this is what we see here. As the client behavior improves, the agency behavior improves. You could statistically argue the other way around, but we understand it from our experience. It is generally the client that will drive the improvement in performance.
So Kim, I know you have a number of client relationships that have gone on for years. And I guess what you can see is over time, when you look at those, some big corporations I know where you do individual country relationship modeling year after year, I guess you can see that, right? So I know from my own experience, as I said, when I was with an ad agency, working with clients and they wanted to use Aprais, that we had that, we would have that discussion with the clients about, well, are you expecting us to make all the changes, or are we working together to make changes? And I think everybody in any relationship has to have that discussion, right?
That's right.
You have to have that. And I'm guessing that one of the great things about using Aprais, or the example that you show, is it sort of forces that discussion to happen.
That's
that
exactly
may not
right.
be happening. Right?
It's exactly right, Dave. In fact, it's a point that I will reiterate throughout this deck, is that whether it's Aprais or not, you really need to have a disciplined approach to evaluating performance, because the mere act of doing it will affect behavioral change. The mere fact that people are presented with a list of questions interrogating their behavior and the way they do things, will make them think about how to do that better in future.
Yeah.
And so, I think your point is actually absolutely right. Of course, we apply a great deal more science to it than that. But the mere fact of just answering a list of questions is going to affect behavior, because you're basically teaching people what they need to be doing better. It's like a personal evaluation, a job evaluation, if you like.
Yep. Great.
So if I move on, better client agency relationships deliver better work. I mentioned this earlier, but what we did was quite nifty. A couple of years ago, I'm sure the audience will have heard of the Effie Awards, the effectiveness awards that are conducted around the world. Well, back in 2019, we went and looked at all the Effie Award winners and delved into finding which agency and which client were involved in winning that award. Then we cross-matched that with the evaluations that we as a company had done. And we found many instances where the teams that were involved actually went on to win awards. So then we thought, well, actually, this is interesting. So if we find out how those teams scored, the ones that actually won awards, if we compared them with our entire database, maybe we can see a difference between those that win awards and those that don't, but still are measured in our system. And what we discovered was that the Effie winners, in terms of the agency scores of their client, were over 2 points above the whole Aprais average. And when it came to the clients who scored the agencies, Effie winners were 4.5 points above the Aprais average. So it makes it quite clear that the teams that actually won the awards were better evaluated by each other than the average. Quite a remarkable finding. And
so great relationships equal great work, right?
Great relationships equal great work, exactly.
Yeah.
Moving on to truth number 3, objective and systematic evaluation improves client agency relationships. This is exactly what you were mentioning before, Dave, and here's the evidence. And it brings to mind this famous quote that which is measured improves, but that which is measured and reported improves exponentially. This is by the founder of mathematical models and science. And what we've found here is that just the mere fact of regular assessment will improve performance. So here we can see the client score of the agency in the first round of an evaluation. So this is the base, if you like, and we're looking at all agency types, creative agencies, and media agencies. Now let's look at what happens as we go through successive rounds, what we call rounds, waves of evaluation. And you can see that as the number of evaluations increase, the scores for all types of agencies, all creative and media, grow to a point where the average after 10 rounds of evaluation is 12 points up. Now remember that apart from the cost of doing the evaluation, this is free. This is extra performance that you've been able to squeeze from your teams just by being able to do a regular assessment. So once again, I thoroughly recommend regular assessments. Let's have a look at this though. What's more important, more interesting is if you look at this, taking the bottom 10%. So if we take all of the relationships that we evaluate and just carve out the bottom 10%, and here we can see the client of agency scores. And if we think of the first round as being indexed at 100, so just 0, you can see that after 2 to 4 rounds, there's already a jump of 9 percentage points. And here, 5 to 9 rounds, 21 points and 25 points after 10 to 14 rounds. That's for all agencies. And the same is true for creative agencies and media agencies. Remember, this is client scores of the agency. So the client's effectively getting 29%, 25%, 20% better perceived value of performance from their agency. Now, the same thing applies to agency evaluation of the clients. As we showed with that graph before, they move together. And so you can see the same thing happens here, 24% after 10 to 14 rounds for all agencies, 25% and so forth. So it's a fairly compelling story that just by the mere fact of doing these evaluations, actually you get better performance. So
strong story.
Strong story. The last point here is that clients who show financial empathy for their agency get better performance. I know this is a controversial subject, and particularly when it comes to procurement, where often procurement people are incentivized to drive costs down. But work that we've done suggests that this might be a self-defeating initiative, because what we did here again, we looked at the scores where clients had said they believe they get the best staff allocation from their agency. We'd clustered a group of questions together around the issue of how do they feel about the level of attention, the staff allocation, the quality of staff that were being applied to their business. And then we looked at that relative to the best 10% clients, the clients who got the highest scores in the eyes of agencies, and the ones that got the worst scores in the eyes of the agency. And it won't come as a great surprise that, that the difference is quite remarkable. 64 was the average among those in the bottom 10% in terms of the perception of the value that they were getting from the agency, versus 79% from those in the top 10%. And obviously that just simply says the more understanding and considerate that clients can be of their agency's need to make a profit, they will actually get better performance from the agency. And I think after the session, there will be the opportunity for you to get the PDF of these slides. I'd suggest, if you're interested in this topic, we have a report on this specific subject that's available for download from the Aprais website.
This is a great story. I love the fact that you actually have the financial value that's added, right? That you can actually see, a return by improving the relationship. You're actually going to get a return, creative performance return in terms of better work, but that work actually then comes out in terms of you're actually going to, save money in the end, right? You save money
absolutely.
because you don't change agencies, basically. So, and the value. I mean, I'd be interested, at maybe towards the end of the session, if we can talk about how incentivization works against this. So, how you found the experience of clients, for example, incentivizing agencies based around these sorts of scores.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about that. Right. So let's talk about how relationships in the healthcare category compare with other business categories. So going back to our 23,000 evaluations, we've been able to bring out some data to compare the scores achieved across different categories. So let's have a look here, and you can see the client of agency scores here in green. And the first thing that you can see is that the agencies in the wine, beer, and spirits category, the non-alcoholic drinks, the confectionery category are all scoring very high. Now let's look at the scores for agency of client. And you can see here a slightly different story, but they tend to stick together. And there I've highlighted the score for healthcare. Now, as we said in the title, I mean, this is a very challenging category, and this is the slide that actually led us to that thinking, because apart from personal care, few other categories are harder to please than healthcare. And I guess the big question is, why would that be? Why is it that healthcare and personal care seem to be difficult to please? And consumer electronics, I guess you could say, is in the same basket.
Well, Personal care, I had distinctly have thoughts because I've worked with some of the world's biggest personal care, and particularly beauty type brands and companies, and some of them were pretty appalling in the way in which they treated their agency. And quite often with the opinion of, no, you'll just do it this way, whether you think it's right or not. So as you would know, when you work inside an agency, there's nothing worse than when you have a client that doesn't want to listen to ideas, just wants you to execute exactly what they say. The healthcare one was sort of interesting. And I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing this session, right? And I think it's sort of interesting. The client scoring of agencies, is that related to something to do with the technicalities of the briefs, the technicality of the category compared to some of the other things? The perception that it's, you've got to be more precise, for example, or you've got to be more detailed in terms of the content.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think, I mean, it's anyone's guess. We don't have the answer, but we can only suppose. And one of the thoughts I had, which we also discussed, was if you look at these ones that get very high scores for clients and agencies, they tend to be in fairly light, frivolous, fun categories. Healthcare is anything but. It's about things that you ingest or that you apply, things that to do with your own health. These can often be extremely serious. There are lots of regulations that need to be adhered to in a country by country basis. And the same thing with personal care, things that you actually apply on your face or other parts of your body. And the same sorts of things, I think that sort of ties these two categories together. If you look at the extremes here, the ones that are very personal and very sensitive and very require a lot of deep thought, as opposed to, which brand of whiskey or beer am I going to buy to drink tomorrow, or Coke versus Pepsi, or whichever it might be in the confectionery world. I guess that was one thought I had. And having worked in these categories in my history as well, I know that particularly the healthcare category, it does attract and has to attract a fairly serious mindset, because you can't afford mistakes. There are so many regulatory requirements around many of the healthcare products and services. So what characteristics are important for healthcare marketing teams? So we want to delve in this a bit deeper, and this is where we start to talk about our roles and our definitions of functions versus behaviors. And first, let's talk about functions. This is how you use your knowledge and effectively in executing your job. And in marketing communications, we have definitions of the functions applied to agencies and the functions applied to marketers. And you can see they're quite different. Account management, strat planning, functional abilities, general management, collaboration, financial management, and many of them are different to what you find in marketers. In fact, functions tend to be quite different depending on the job function that you're performing. So whether it's, if we're evaluating sales teams, for example, the nature of the product that they're selling or the nature of the team itself, we would probably have to reflect different functions for that specific team or that circumstance. So let's have a look at how these map out. And what we've done to achieve a comparison here is look at the gap between the scores achieved by the top 10% of agencies versus clients and the bottom 10%. And you can see the gap. So for example, let me explain. Here we've got agencies' evaluation of a client. And what this is telling us is that there is an 8-point gap between the performance of the best and the worst clients on this issue, which means that it's an opportunity for poor performing clients to get better, to actually close the gap with the best. And we know from experience that briefing is always a very, very
big issue.
very big issue, very controversial. And as long as I've been in the business, and I'm sure the same with you, Dave, it's always been a problem, you know, that people just don't seem to be able to get right.
Yeah.
On the client of agency side of things, the gap here is in media buying, the biggest gap, the opportunity for an agency, particularly a media buying agency, to actually close the gap, and so on up the scale, media planning, creative, and so forth and so forth. So that's the kind of the learning that comes from that. But I think where our interest is leaning now is moving, in addition to looking at the functional aspects of a team, is to looking at their behaviours. And we've identified 7 behaviours that distinguish the best healthcare clients and agency relationships from the worst. And the thing that makes these relationships or the studying of behaviours different. Behaviours is about the way in which someone conducts themselves or behaves. And so, whereas I said before with functions, these are fairly unique to each discipline, each job function. The wonderful thing about behaviours is that they are common regardless of the team, regardless of the industry, regardless of the function that you perform. And there are 7 of them: accountability, challenge, goals, functional issues, communication, resilience, and trust. So I'd like to just quickly define each one of these, because we're going to show some data around each of these in a moment. So accountability, as it implies, is that the team actually sets and takes responsibilities for actions and decisions. Challenge is about the team using its initiative to challenge the status quo and not allowing conflict to go unaddressed. You know, it's like, do I make an issue of that, or do I just forget that and let it go by? Or do I actually say, no, here we have a problem, let's deal with it now? Right. Goals, setting clear objectives so that information is shared, the team is stretched, and the success is actually measured. So putting some tangible performance goals around. Functional is the ability to do the day-to-day, because even though we're talking behaviours, if you're no good at what you do, you're actually going to fail regardless. So we have to look at functional performance as one of the behaviours. Communication, regular dialogue that ensures that facts are shared in a timely fashion across the entire team. Resilience, very important in the COVID times, the ability for both client and agency, regardless of your job function, to be able to bounce back, to be able to, you know, take the punches and bounce back quickly with better solutions and get back into the market quickly. And finally, trust. No relationship can exist without trust, as I'm sure we all know. And this is about the team being trusted to deliver, and a team that behaves with integrity at all times. So with that in mind, let's have a look at behavioral differences. Again, taking the top 10% and the bottom 10% so that we can see a contrast between the best performers and the worst performers, and seeing where the gaps exist in the performance of the two. And what this tells us here is that in terms of the agency's view of a client, the biggest gap is in the area of challenge. So what the agencies are saying there to their clients is, please be more brave. Take brave decisions and stick with them. Be prepared to fight for our corner. In terms of resilience, particularly during the COVID times, this has become an issue. And communication, trust. As I said at the beginning, all of these behaviors are critical. None of them are necessarily more important than others. But what we're looking at here is, in the healthcare category, these are the ones that separate the men from the boys, so to speak. These are the ones where there is the greatest opportunity for poor performers to actually close the gap on the best. So what about the client's evaluation of the agency? And well, no surprise there, challenge is another one. And I've been thinking about this, and I wonder why it is challenge is so important in both of these cases. And I believe, again, having worked in the agency business for a number of years, agencies tend to only be able to challenge their clients when they are in a very honest, open, and mutually respected environment where they don't feel at risk if they speak out. If they feel that when they speak out, they're going to be slapped down or they're going to be criticized, or worse, they may actually lose the business, then of course they won't. And I think another aspect of this that might be contributing to the challenge is the large number of younger people and relatively inexperienced people coming in who don't have the experience, perhaps, to take those strong positions. What do you think, Dave?
Kim, as you say that, I'm reminded of a particular situation when I happened to be working in Japan, and our agency did some work with a big global companies, Japan. They had a very large Japanese operation. We were one of their 3 or 4 agencies, I think. We had about a third, maybe 40% of their total business, and the rest of it was split with the other 3 agencies. Well, what was interesting was that after a couple of years, the agency that was the next biggest agency to ours in terms of servicing this client, the head of that agency approached me one day and said, when we're doing major presentations to the president of the client's company and the senior management, I said, yeah, I know. Yeah. Like, you got to do one every 2 weeks. The way it was structured, we have to go in every 2 weeks. And then usually the day after, this other agency was going in. And he said, could you come to our presentations? I said, what? And he goes, yeah. He said, because you have a fantastic relationship. You're the only person we know who can sit there with the president and the marketing director and basically tell them what you really think. And they actually don't try to fire you on the spot. So could you come? Because we think it'll just calm them down so that they will actually listen to us. And so I was in that weird position of being asked to go, not present anything, just be in the room, because they thought I could act as a bit of a cushion. Now, to keep everybody happy, we did it for a while, but I had to point out to both parties, both the clients and to these other agencies, that that was that can't be a thing that you make happen all the time. Just be reliant on Dave, who happens to everybody likes, be in the room. And so it forced the situation of reevaluating why couldn't other agencies have that relationship. And to your point, one of the reasons that I think sometimes that's difficult is, have you got somebody in the room that the client respects or that has the right experience? And, unfortunately, we live in a world where, a lot of people, we all know a lot of people in agencies, and there's nothing wrong with being 30 years of age, but there's a lot of people in their 30s. And sometimes you're then dealing with a very senior client, and you just need to bridge that gap. And it's not about hiring older people, although available if you need me, but it's actually about, understanding what kind of person that client will listen to. And I think sometimes the matching of people is the first thing. And that helps when you're talking about challenging, right? I think that helps to understand, are they going to actually listen to this? Do they have the right experience? Are you doing the right things to get that relationship sort of working, right?
Yeah. I always used to think of it as being about conviction and passion. And, as an account guy, if you're going in with an idea, you have to believe it. And it's kind of your responsibility to convince the client that it's great. Right. And if you don't have that conviction and passion, and you're prepared to really put your passion into it and sell, then you can't expect a client to buy it. Clients don't want to buy something that they don't think that even you subscribe to. So, it's in some respects, it comes down to raw salesmanship.
Right, but that also leads me to a question. when you look at this chart, this is based on healthcare and the category of healthcare. Do you see with the other categories, is it a similar pattern in terms of which is the behaviours that are the biggest gap? Is it challenge come through consistently, or is that peculiar to certain categories?
It does vary. It does vary by category. I would not say it varies a lot, but it does vary by category. And if we look overall, I think the thing that we've found overall is that challenge is one of the critical things right now that's driving relationships and distinguishing the best from the worst, if you like. Challenge is something, and I think it comes back to all those issues that we just talked about: the relative experience and the ability to take risks, the confidence to take risks. And yet, in both cases, that what we have to come back and look at this again, in both cases, of the perspective from a client looking at the agency and the agency looking at clients, both are saying, please challenge. We want you to challenge. That's what this is saying.
Yeah. But it's a bit like it's like a hidden thing. Like, I'm asking to challenge, but maybe I'm just not being open enough in the way I'm inviting that challenging or responding to the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before, but we've both been in situations where, a client or the agent say, yeah, please challenge us. But at the very first time you challenge them, you get a negative response and you sort of go, oh, I'm not going to do that again, right? So I think asking for a challenging environment is great, but then you have to be open to the consequences of that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's perhaps where learning, for example, when I look at this chart, and learning that, challenge is maybe the thing that you've got to first focus on or improve on. You then need to have, some sort of processes. You can't just turn around and say, we're going to improve on how we challenge each other. There's got to be methodologies put in place, workshops, the sort of work that, we've talked about. The most successful relationships are not on just getting the score, but having the tools to actually solve problems. Right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is the tendency, perhaps because we're old agency hands, is to think of this on the agency side, but this is equally applicable on the client side. So, marketers within their organizations also have to, pluck up the courage to be able to defend their decisions, to actually take risks within their sort of marketing organization as well.
Yep.
Right. So the other interesting thing is that if we can look at these behaviors and look at the differences across the different scopes or different types of agency, we also see differences. Now, so what we're looking at here are the scores of client scores of the agency by different agency type. So this orange bar is creative, and you can see how the scores vary here, and you can see this big jump here in trust, showing that this is clearly a very highly rated and very important aspect. Let's compare that then with things like digital, where you see a less challenging emphasis here. Equal levels of trust and so forth. Media buying, which is very tangible, because it's very numbers based and it's very accountable. So you see a higher accountability score here. Trust is lower here, but I'm going to throw up the last one: public relations. Look at trust for public relations. Whoops.
Yeah.
Look at trust. Yeah. Because public relations, it's a skill that's all about shaping opinions. And if you don't have trust in your public relations agency to be your spokespeople, to represent your brand to the market, then you have a real problem. So trust is quite clearly very, very critical here. You can see
I noticed too on accountability also is quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
That perhaps those two disciplines that are less numeric based are the ones where it becomes more important.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And the one that is numerically based is media, and you can see goals. Goals are very, very important here. You know, because we can set top objectives and reach goals and so forth. We've got numbers we can apply to those things.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So we're sort of coming toward the end here, and I'd just like to touch on this issue of COVID. It's obviously very topical, and it's very, very important because, as we know, the last year has presented us with ways of working that we've never before experienced in our histories, even old blokes like you and me. We've been required to change and operate in ways that we could never have imagined just 18 months ago. And so, you know, we decided that we wanted to understand a little bit more about how this might have impacted on the client agency dynamic. And one way to do that was to see how frequently our clients contact their agencies and how frequently our agency clients contact their clients. And so, in the Aprais evaluation system, when a participant goes online, in the welcome screen, one of the first questions that's asked is, how frequently do you contact your client or your agency, as the case may be? And so we decided to lift out that data and have a look at the statistics for 2020 versus 2021, and the first half, second half of each of the years. And what we see here is that, for example, in the first half of 2020, clients contacted their agency 1 to 3 times a month. 36% of them did so. 19% in the second half, 32% in the first half of this year, and 33% in the current period that we're in right now. So then if we look at the other elements there, 1 to 3 times a week and every day, what we see is quite interesting, that clients contacted agencies went up in terms of everyday contact in the second half of last year. And I guess the reason for this is quite clear. In the first half, we were all coming to terms with COVID. Then we realized that it wasn't going to go away and we had to change the way of working. And the reaction of that was to increase the client contacting their agency every day. And what we see now in 2021 is a return to some form of normalcy. It's almost back to the way it was back at the beginning of 2020. Now let's have a look at agency contacting the client. And what we see here is an even more dramatic change in the first half of 2020. And you see 51% of agencies said they contacted their client every day. And fortunately, looks like it's starting to trend back to around about the pre-COVID levels. One would hope so. So the question really is, with this dramatic jump in frequent contact, what was the impact on the industry? And what was the impact, more importantly here, on client agency relationships? And I can tell you that from our data, there was very, very little change in the relationship scores during that period. So it says that although this behavior changed, there was much more frequent contact between client and agency, there was no appreciable change in the actual scores for the relationship. So led us to believe that frequency of contact is not that critical to improving relationship. It's more about the quality. Now, to drive this point home, when people perform an evaluation on the Aprais system, we often request, and in some cases mandate, that they put in a written comment, either at the question level or after each section. And what we've found during this latter period is increasing number of complaints from agencies saying, we're burned out, we can't do this anymore, the pace is too fast, you're not giving us enough time. And on the other side of this coin, clients are saying to the agencies, look, guys, can you please try to consolidate your questions or create an agenda that we can work through rather than giving us 3 calls a day from different people. And they're asking the agencies to sort of coordinate their contact better to actually take the stress out of their work lives. And I think that's a critical learning here, that if we are going to be spending more time away from offices and not able to interact directly, then surely we've got to find better, more efficient ways that don't, put undue mental stress, mental health, and incur mental health issues on our teams, whether they be client teams or agency teams.
Yeah, I'm sure, it's an interesting thing that you raised. I remember when you showed us this chart a few weeks ago, and I was thinking back to, unfortunately, I lived in Hong Kong during SARS. I lived in Japan during the big earthquake, a number of years ago now. Things where business shut down, and nowhere near, what we've gone through in the last 18 months, but periods where we would have a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of really disruptive environments. And yes, there was that confusion about what to do. There was the seeming need to, we better check in, we better check in, we better check in. But I remember one client of mine in Hong Kong many years ago when SARS happened, actually saying basically what you did, which was like, hey, calm down. It's all right. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow either. But we just got to stop panicking about everything, because you know what? The world isn't ending. It's just having a bit of a blip, I think was the term that she used, right? Yeah. And so there is that automatic term. Actually, while you're thinking about this, old mate Chris Kime has sent in a message. I know you know Chris as well. And he's asking, does the client contacting agency depend on the type of business? Because it's obviously some accounts are much more active day to day. I think you did. I used to work on supermarket accounts, which was like toxic, minute by minute calls about what's the sale of the day. But yeah, it would depend on categories and things.
Definitely. Yeah, retail would be the classic, wouldn't it? Minute by minute contact there, I guess. You'd be not every day, it's like every hour or every minute. It would change a lot. This is an average over an enormous number of cases. So
yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to have a look, at, if people are interested to come back to you and sort of, if clients want to look inside a category and see how that shifts, and what that means.
Sure. Well,
and the great thing is that we've just talked about this, as you've said, I can't remember, it was like 20-something thousand, of projects that you've done. So you have this vast database, and I think we're going to get to it, but there's these category reports, but then of course people can get back and, once they you start using your services, they get into real detail. And I know one of the values that I used to have after a number of years with one particular client was being able to really get into how we compared with other Japanese clients when I was in Japan, or how we compared to the same categories of business or similar sizes of business, or how, different countries and specifics, and, able to get to some really interesting data.
I think that the main benefit that we offer is the fact that we can actually give you perspective on your performance, on your team's performance, because if you don't have an external benchmark to compare with, then it's like looking at yourself in the mirror. You may think you look pretty good, but if you can see how you compare with other people in the same room, then it may change your perspective a lot. You might be outperforming, or you may be well below the average. And that's, I think, a very valuable insight that we can give. As you say, we've got so many cases now that, we can look at particular category in a particular agency type in a particular country. We can drill down to that level of granularity. So let me just press on and just conclude by saying that no matter which category, we're talking specifically healthcare here, but it applies to all categories. The CMO is kind of in the driver's seat. It's therefore the kind of the orchestra leader. leading their own team and the agency team to achieve the needs of the brand. And we think that having a team that has aligned goals, has an aligned structure, has a way in which they can determine their performance is a very valuable thing. And everybody will win. Both teams will win.
Kim, we've got another question from Mike Harley, who's our CHC guy down in Melbourne. And Mike's question is, in your experience, then, what's the driver of improved performance? Is it just the measurement, or is it the coaching and mentoring and training of clients to improve, or based on the measurement to improve what needs to be improved? Is it just telling them a score surely isn't enough? What you need to do is go beyond that, right?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question, Mike. I think it's the both is the answer. One doesn't live well without the other. I think you've got to have a good system. You must have a system of some sort. It could be Aprais, we hope it is, but if it's not, it just needs to be a system, and it has to be regular. It's got to be disciplined. It has to be objective, and it has to be fair. But getting that information is just the beginning of the journey. If you don't do anything with that information, it's totally useless. What you have to do then is, as a group of individuals, come together and say, what is this telling us, and how can we improve? And sometimes that requires facilitation, and of course we do that, having people go in and actually helping to, develop action plans coming out of the data. And then, one of the things about our system is that we strongly recommend that it's done every 6 months, because if you leave it for 12 months, the problems become sometimes too big to wrestle with. Whereas if you do it every 6 months, you can actually tweak and change direction a little bit before they become major issues. Yeah.
Well, I know from my own experience, again, one of the things about doing it every 6 months was because of the cycle of business. So, what you want to do is do it in such a way. If you do it just once a year, you might be doing it at that time of the year where, the business is a bit slack, or it might be the time of the year when you're thinking about plans for next year and everybody's under huge pressure. Whereas if you can do it twice, it sort of balances out a bit more to give it a more objective opinion.
When I invented the system back in 20 years ago, I did it with the intention of making sure that many of the problems I'd experienced personally as an agency manager would be overcome. And one of the problems I experienced as an agency manager was that anytime we were evaluated, it was usually on the eve of a negotiation about contract or a bonus. And I thought, well, that's going to happen. It's going to happen, and human nature being as it is. But at least if we do it every 6 months, it will smooth out that process so that it doesn't become a weapon. It becomes a guide. And I really firmly believe that's very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. And I think that, in our discussions and my discussions with Steve, and so everybody is aware in the audience that Steve's company and with me, we're now consulting with Aprais and with some clients on how to use Aprais. And part of that goes back to Mike's question, which is, not using this as a crisis tool to negotiate the next fee, but using this as a tool for ongoing relationship building, and therefore putting in the right coaching and mentoring procedures to say, look, we need to tweak this, we need to do that, we can improve things. Here's the numbers, and the numbers are not just a vague discussion. Look, there's numbers here, there's things that we know we can improve on. Now let's go and put in place the practices that will lead to that improvement through the right advice, coaching tools. Kim, we're sort of running out of time, buddy. Could I ask you to just finish up with, what do you see as the 4 key takeaways that you think people need to take away from what you've been talking about?
Okay. You like putting me on the spot, don't you, Dave?
Yeah.
So, look, I think there's a couple of key things. First, we believe firmly that stronger relationships build stronger business. Maintaining a healthy working relationship or working together to repair one, showing signs of stress is less disruptive and cheaper than the cost of replacement. That's first thing. Second, although our primary work is in the area of client agency relationships, and those relationships have specific role-based functional disciplines, behaviours are consistent across all team scopes. So any team can learn from them. So I implore everybody to look at the behaviours, and we're going to be issuing in another month or two, we're going to be issuing a series of reports on each of those 7 behaviours. Third point would be, I think people like doing with people they like. They like doing business with people they like. And clients are the paying customers, and therefore they are in the stronger position to influence the overall relationship. Our data shows that as the relationship of their behavior improves, the client's behavior improves, that the overall relationship will improve. And no improvement is possible without conscious effort, without discipline, measurement, and monitoring. And the final thing would be in regard to COVID and working from home. I think what we've seen is it makes it too easy to be always on. And in the interests of mental health of our co-workers, we need to try to find better ways of working. Agencies are urged to consolidate their meetings into an agenda that clients can go through in one session rather than multiple sessions. And clients to consolidate their responses as well. The essence being quality over quantity will always win.
That's great. Well, it's a really interesting discussion. Obviously I'm biased because it's something that I've been involved in for most of my career, as of you in your previous agency role. I guess that's what led to you developing Aprais. Thanks for your time, Kim. It's been really terrific. I think, and I encourage everybody to maybe go to the Aprais site, easy enough to find, and there's lots of cases you can download, as you said, these papers that you've been writing about different categories, more to come. There's a lot of great information there. And then just get in touch if you want to know more. And so with that, thanks very much, Kim. And I'm going to turn it back to Sheila to explain what we're going to be doing on our next webinar.
Yes, but before that, Dave, allow me to say thank you to you and Kim for that really valuable insights on behaviors, characteristics, and how to build stronger business relationships. Allow me to thank you also everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Kabkun, maraming salamat. And again, as Dave mentioned before we part, let us invite you again to our October webinar, which is on the topic of modern growth playbook with Michelle Bottomley. All right. On behalf of the Consumer Healthcare Training Academy, I would like to invite you all to find us on LinkedIn, that is Kim's and Dave's, to continue our conversation and discussion today. We look forward to seeing you again in October. But for now, I'd like to say goodbye and take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Have a blessed Wednesday. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.